One of Project's important benefits is its ability to calculate the schedule. But sometimes tasks need to occur on specific dates or have other kinds of date restrictions. While manually scheduled tasks let you set task start and finish dates, date constraints are another project feature that let you set task dates with degrees of flexibility, like a task that can start no earlier or later than a specific date. The Task Details form is the best place to work on date constraints. We can see in this view the task form is in the Details pane, but it's easy to change that. On the View tab, go to the Split View section and click the down arrow in the Details box. Then choose More Views. In the More Views dialog box, find Task Details form, select it, and click Apply. And now you can see that there's a box for the constraint type and the date. Well, actually, this constraint type shows you something, which is that every single task has a type of date constraint. But in this case, PackOffice has the most flexible kind, which is as soon as possible. And what that means is when you schedule a project from the start date, it will automatically apply as soon as possible to every task you create. And that means it calculates the start date based on predecessors, duration, and resource assignments, but the task occurs as soon as it can possibly do that. But let's look at other kinds of constraints. So we have load moving truck. Well, suppose the moving company tells you that it's busy until June 12th. So that means you can load the moving truck anytime after June 12th, but you can't do it before that. So the type of constraint you need is a start no earlier than. So in the constraint box, click the down arrow and choose Start No Earlier Than. And then you can put the date in the date box. So this task can't start any earlier than June 12th. When I click OK, nothing changes in the time scale. Well, and that's because just based on the duration of PackOffice, Load Moving Truck is scheduled to start on June 16th, and that's after the June 12th date. But you can see there's an indicator in the indicator cell, and that's for a date constraint. So if you point at it, you can see that there's a Start No Earlier Than constraint, and it's set for June 12th. Start No Earlier Than is known as a partially flexible constraint. That means there's some restriction on the date, but it can happen any time after June 12th. So the date is flexible as long as it's after June 12th. On the other hand, if I change the duration of PackOffice to 5 days, now you can see that the load moving truck does move earlier, but of course, it starts on June 12th, not any earlier. Now, date constraints actually inhibit projects' ability to calculate the schedule, at least to a certain extent. So you don't want to have any more date constraints than you should. Unfortunately, you can introduce some date constraints that you don't intend. Let me show you how that happens. If I drag this taskbar in the timescale, you can see an indicator shows up and that all of a sudden there's a new Start No Earlier Than constraint set to June 5th. Well, that happened because I manually dragged that taskbar. So sometimes if you're trying to create links or doing different things with tasks in the timescale, you may inadvertently move a taskbar, and then you have a date constraint that you don't want. The easiest way to look through your schedule and just make sure that you only have the date constraints you want is by filtering the list. On the View tab, click the down arrow in the filter box, and then go to More Filters. The filter you want is Tasks with Fixed Dates, so select that and click Apply. And now you can see I only have the tasks that have date constraints. So in this case, I look through and say, well, PackOffice shouldn't have a constraint. So I can select that row, come down to the Task Details form, and change it to as soon as possible. And everything's fixed. Date constraints are ideal if you need to restrict task dates with different levels of flexibility. Make sure your schedule has only the date constraints you need, so Project can do its job calculating the project schedule.